Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and I just hit Legend rank in Season 27 of Pokemon Go Battle League. In today's video, I'm going to be showcasing the team that took me to the top, and it's a team I built around a very powerful Pokemon, Lapras. Lapras is an amazing anti-meta pick for this current Great League meta. Lapras wins matchups it is no business winning, including beating Trailblaze Florges in the 1s straight Ice Beam. It can beat Licky in the 0s, Corsola in the 0s and 1s. Lapras has play into almost everything that you can encounter. For the rest of the team, I have Drain Punch, Shadow Sableye, and Azumarill, so this is an ABA team with 2 water types. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we pick up a dominant lead win in the first match, Lapras into Altaria. Lapras in this meta should always be on Ice Beam. Ice Beam gives you amazing coverage into so many popular Pokemon. My opponent retreats into Empoleon, and I'm going to counter switch with the Sableye. My team is very ABA strong into the Altaria, so I don't need to protect the Sableye. Switch advantage is very unimportant. Hydro Cannon lands, that does quite a lot of damage, but I'm able to hang on and hit back hard with the Drain Punch. My opponent realizes they can't get the farm down, they're going to fire off a Hydro Cannon, but this is just going to set up a diabolical Psywave farm down for the Lapras. So it can bring back in the Lapras, we get the Psywave down of Empoleon, and now the Altaria just has nowhere to go. If the Altaria doesn't get brought in here, it's going to get destroyed by the Azumarill. They bring back in the Altaria, and they're just about to get one-shot by Ice Beam. Ice Beam lands, Altaria gets KO'd. In the back is Swampert, so they are running ABB double water, and Lapras has just completely run away with this game. Swampert will put up the shield. Even if my opponent isn't running Sludge, I'm probably low enough where Hydro Cannon would take the knockout. I'm going to put up the shield just because I need to guarantee the final shield or get some nice damage onto the Swampert. If they no shield, they just get bubbled down. If they shield, then they just get Hydro Pumped. They end up no shielding, in comes Azumarill. Even if they have Sludge, Azumarill is just way too bulky. My opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We pick up a terrible lead in the next match as I lead Lapras into Shadow Sableye. Shadow Sableye double resists my Psywave, so this is a very negative matchup. But even though it's a bad lead, I'm not going to be switching out just yet. I'm going to wait for them to Drain Punch, fire off an Ice Beam, and now once I've gotten a shield or some damage onto the Sableye, then I'm going to switch into the Mirror. My opponent's going to stay in, they're going to fire off a potential foul play to guarantee a shield advantage before they pivot out. I have to respect the foul play here. My opponent sends in Licky, and being up 4 Shadow Claws means that if my opponent doesn't end up getting a bait call right here, then they could be in a tremendous amount of trouble. The only way this game doesn't go off the rails for my opponent is if they go for a bait here. If they go for the Shadow Ball, I'm going to get 3 Drain Punch boosts set up before they can land any damage onto the Sableye. I can fire off Drain Punch number 2, and guess what? We outpace by a turn. We're able to get a 3rd Drain Punch. Our Sableye is now at +3 defense, and there's just nothing this Licky is ever going to be able to do. Licky farms up a ton of energy. They can go for the Shadow Ball. Sableye is always going to be hanging on here. My opponent pivots their Sableye into mine, but I'm so boosted I just farmed them down. This is truly the immortal Sableye. If my opponent switches into the 3rd, which they do, I'm just going to save the energy and then send in Azumarill. My opponent's final Pokemon is Corviknight. Corviknight can't really do any damage to Azumarill. They have to try and fish for the boost. They go for the Air Cutter. They do not get the boost. It's a 30% chance every Air Cutter that is thrown for them to get a +1 attack boost. But unfortunately, it appears the luck is not with them in this one. I'm just going to go straight Hydro Pump. I want a guaranteed damage or a shield. They end up no shield and they pay a very heavy price. Switch timer will now be up, and my opponent can look to bring back in the Licky. But if Licky ends up firing off its energy here, which they do, then I've just won the game. Because my opponent has an Air Cutter banked on the Corviknight, but I can just go for a nasty Psywave down with the Lapras. My opponent needs a payback into the Lapras, and they just simply can't outpace. Sparkling Aria will pressure the shield, and then I can 0-turn switch into the Sableye and win charge attack priority. So I pivot back into the Sableye, launch the foul play, and even despite a pretty rough lead, we're able to get the win. The Shadow Sableye getting itself up to +3 defense allowed me to just completely run away with the game. We move to the next match, leading Lapras into Corsola. For this lead, I like to try and go for a catch of the Nightshade. My opponent does not throw energy, but then they send a Mantine into my Azumarill save switch. For those who don't know, Mantine is completely walled by Azumarill, so this is a very interesting switch by my opponent. Mantine is very bulky. They should be able to barely survive 2 play roughs and all the bubbles, but if this is their best response to Azumarill, then it's clear that Azumarill is a massive core breaker for the team. The fact that they sent in Mantine and didn't just stay in with the Corsola also tells me that they're probably pretty weak to Lapras energy. They feel like they had to throw away the Mantine here and keep the Corsola, as that's their only way of getting through this Lapras. I fire off the Play Rough. Play Rough is going to get them very low. My opponent is going to make a last-second charge attack, and honestly, for being walled, Mantine put up quite the fight here. Water Pulse will get me very low. In comes the Corsola. In the moment, I didn't think that I would make the Hydro Pump, but as it turns out, I actually would have got there, so a bit of a misplay by me. My opponent has a ton of energy on the Corsola. I'm predicting that it's going to be another flyer in the back. So I end up sending it the Sableye, and I will click no shield. My opponent will be able to make another Nightshade. I'm doubling down. I think it's a flyer. I'm trusting in Lapras. So I end up no shielding. In the back is going to be Fearow, and I'm just up so much energy. The fact that my opponent sent a Mantine in, it made me think it had to be something weak to Azumarill. Ice Beam takes the knockout, and that's a good game. Hopping into the next match, we pick up a negative lead Lapras into Tinkaton. Now, this is one of the Pokemon that this team is pretty weak to. However, this team actually has a very good win rate against Tinkaton teams. And that's because if you have a high rank Lapras, they can't go for a Gigaton Hammer into a Bulldoze in the zeros. My Lapras is the rank 2. I got it while casting the Seattle Regionals. So, even though my opponent can get me pretty low, this is definitely not Bulldoze range. They're going to be forced to fire off an entire Gigaton Hammer, and I'm able to get them very low. My opponent pivots out, they save switch into Annihilate, and boy do I have a Pokemon for this. I can send in the Sableye, one Shield Shadow Claw all the way down, and then, even though they have a bunch of energy stored on the Tinkaton, I have back-to-back Drain Punches stored on the Sableye. So, now I'm just going to try and snowball the Sableye, get it boosted up, and try and make life as uncomfortable as possible for my opponent. They send in the Tinkaton, it's going to be a Charge Attack Priority Tie, Drain Punch is going to be shielded, and I'm going to be giving my final shield right back. They go for the Bulldoze, fishing for the debuff, they pivot out in the back, their final Pokemon is going to be Furret. I'm now at the back-to-back Drain Punches here. Foul Play will do more damage than a Drain Punch, so a bit of a miscue by me to go for the Drain Punch, as I am going to be pivoting out. But a lot of Furrets are now running Brick Break, and if they're running Brick Break, that means they have a profoundly terrible matchup into Azumarill. I'm able to get the catch and sneak on the Swift, and now I can just throw the Play Rough as soon as I get it. Even if my opponent ends up getting a catch on a Tinkaton, it still won't be able to win them the game. So I'm just going to fire off the Play Rough as soon as I get there. My opponent does end up getting the catch on a Tinkaton. I debated undercharging, but then remembered, oh yeah, they have energy. I just need them gone. Back in comes the Furret. The Azu is just simply too healthy, and my opponent will resign the match. We pick up a great lead in the next match, Lapras into Shadow Marowak. My opponent save switches into a Shadow Volt Switch Fortress, and I'm going to respond with Sableye. While this team is ABA weak to Electric, I was actually able to beat a surprising amount of Electric Pokemon with this team. Volt Switch Fortress didn't end up being too much of a problem. Usually I stayed in, fired off a Sparkling Aria, and then ended up just aggressively save switching into the Azumarill, because if they're leading Volt Switch Fortress, usually that's their only Azu counter. They're forced to stay in, throw all their energy, apply debuffs, and then the Sableye Lapras duo is usually able to sweep for me. In this game, I'm just going to absorb energy on the Azumarill, my opponent pivots back into the Marowak, and I can send in the Lapras. I'm pretty confident their final Pokemon is going to be Carbink. That is the usual third with Marowak plus Fortress. Marowak has been nerfed, so Marowak is not nearly as strong as it used to be, and this team does very, very well into Marowak. My opponent will fire off what can only be a Bone Club, but I feel pretty okay shielding here. If it is Carbink, then the fact that I have so much HP remaining on my Azumarill is going to put me in a very good spot. So I throw 5 Psy Waves, fire off the Sparkling Aria, KO the Marowak. Let's see, is it going to be the Carbink? Yes, it is the Carbink. And now my opponent only has one win condition, and that's going for the Hydro Pump catch onto their Fortress. So I pivot into the Azumarill, I'm going to farm up to the Hydro Pump, and just stop tapping. My opponent tries for the catch, they do not get it, we get the bubble down, and my opponent will resign the match. We move straight to the next match, and we pick up a pretty decent lead, Lapras into Shadow Kingdra. Shadow Kingdra does put up a better fight into Lapras than the regular, because Swift does quite a bit more damage. My opponent, they try for what would have been a nasty double resisted Ice Beam catch onto the Celio, but I'm able to hold the energy and send in the Shadow Sableye. My opponent now goes for a devastating double resisted Body Slam bait, reading the fact that I'm a Drain Punch Sableye, I'm always going to be shielded in the first, and that ends up saving them quite a bit of energy. That's going to let them make a Surf. I'm at +1 defense. However, I'm going to end up losing almost my entire health bar. Thankfully, I survive on 1 HP, I fire off the Drain Punch, and my opponent actually shields for switch advantage. I'm going to bring back in the Lapras. If my opponent sends in the Kingdra, they're going to have a pretty rough time of it. They actually send in Jellicent as their final Pokemon. Jellicent is a core breaker to the Lapras plus Azu duo. But with this much energy on the Lapras, and still being outside of Shadow Ball range, I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot to close out the game. My opponent does have a ton of energy on the Shadow Kingdra, but Shadow Kingdra is going to have a very tough time against the Azumarill. Jellicent fires off the Shadow Ball, I'm able to hang on, and I will go for the slightly harder hitting Ice Beam. Ice Beam won't take the knockout here, but it will put my opponent pretty low. They can look to bank the Shadow Ball and send in the Shadow Kingdra, and I respond with a Azumarill. This is a matchup where I would want to have Ice Beam, as Ice Beam, even though it is only neutral, would be a faster charge stack to get to than Play Rough. And because of the Shadow, Ice Beam would probably come pretty close to Ticket the Knockout, whereas these Swifts are slowly adding up more and more over time. Swift does not 4-shot from the Shadow Kingdra, but it will get me very, very low. Play Rough will be shielded. The slow pacing of Azumarill getting exploited by this massive energy head start on the Kingdra. Kingdra fires off another Swift. I reach for the Play Rough, but unfortunately I'm not able to get there. I do survive this Swift, and now I'm just going to click the Play Rough on the Azumarill, but it's a charge attack priority tie. This Kingdra is going off, and now my opponent should have the game won. I have one play, and that is, after I knock them out, to throw a bubble, switch into the Lapras, and try and snipe them with Psywaves. I throw that bubble, pivot into the Lapras, Psywave down the Jellicent, and somehow escape with a win. We pick up a great lead in the next match, Lapras into Shadow Canine. The Kanto Ninetales matchup is another reason why you want a very high-rank Lapras, as a high-rank Lapras can survive a Shadow Energy Ball and just never be embered down, whereas a bad IV Lapras might actually get farmed down in the 2s. I like Shielded the first, as my opponent will actually go for a diabolical Weather Ball bait. Normally they don't end up going for the bait there because Lapras can survive it, but my opponent apparently just read me like a book. That bait was incredible, but my opponent ends up double baiting, I end up calling it, and now I feel like I'm in a pretty good position. Sparkling Aria is going to be getting the shield. I just can't make the next Sparkling Aria, but I should only be one Psywave away. I put up the shield as they go for the Energy Ball. There's the Sparkling Aria, and I'm going to be able to win the 2 shield. Normally, I'm not this healthy, but because I ended up no-shielding a Weather Ball instead of an Energy Ball, now I can actually make an Ice Beam into the Kingdra. My opponent saves the Kingdra energy. They catch onto Celia where it's going to be double resisted, but it's bad news for them, as now I can just send in the Sableye. I'm going to fire off the Drain Punch right away, boost up my defense, and that poor Kingdra has taken enough Psywave damage to where it's now in Play Rough range. So I can just go for the full farm down. My opponent is forced to fire off a last-second charge stack here. Surf barely misses the knockout out of the Sableye, and I will even get a foul play into the Kingdra. Kingdra has just taken so much damage throughout the course of this game. They have to hope it's something they can one-shot in the back, but it's the bulky Azumarill, and they're going to concede the match. We move to the next match, going up against the world champion Beelzeboy, and it's a negative lead for me. Lapras into Empoleon. However, Lapras is such a menace that it actually wins the zeros against Empoleon. So even though this is a negative matchup, I can still stay in and play it out because I'm guaranteed to either win switch advantage or shield advantage. So he can fire off the Drill Pecks. I'm very okay tanking the 2 Drill Pecks, and I'm just going to keep spamming out Sparkling Arias. He's farmed up till 1 before the back-to-back Drill Pecks, so I'm going to throw 1 Psywave and then fire off my Aria. So I go for the Aria, he waits the turn, catches onto Altaria. That's an absolutely unreal play. But unfortunately, the second hard counter to Altaria hits the field as in comes Azumarill. I really felt like an advantage of playing this team as an ABA is that normally people would assume that if the hard check to Dragons has been neutralized on the lead, then their Dragon would have strong play at the back. But unfortunately, it does not, as I can send in the second hard check to the Dragons, and now this Altaria is in a very rough spot. I'm expecting him to shield here because the switch timers are misaligned. He can shield up the Play Rough, pivot back into the Empoleon, and save the Altaria for later. But Drill Peck's not going to knock out here, so I can just no shield, pivot into the Sableye, and get a nasty 4 Shadow Claw head start. I'm up a shield, I'm up energy, and I'm feeling very good about Sableye's chances for sweeping this game. He's going to bring back in the Altaria. I'm going to look to farm up and fire off a Foul Play right as I believe he's entered Foul Play range. This is going to be close. Foul Play is going to land, but Altaria hangs on, 1 HP remaining. I'm forced to put up the shield as it was a CMP tie, and his final Pokemon is revealed to be Sylveon. Sylveon is definitely a wild card pick, and unfortunately it walls off Sableye's energy. However, Sableye is kind of just the best Pokemon, so watch this. Sableye fires off the first Foul Play, it's going to be no shield, and fires off the second Foul Play as well. Sylveon tries to farm down, but it's Sableye that farms down the Sylveon, entirely walled. Not a problem for Sableye. What an incredible Pokemon, and we're able to take the win. We get a dominant lead win in the next match, Lapras into Mantine. Mantine actually has a pretty good matchup into Celio. However, Lapras obliterates Mantine. It is an incredibly dominant win. Lapras ends up going for an Ice Beam into a Sparkling Aria. You always end up winning the zeros, and you exit with a good amount of HP. Ice Beam lands, and they're already rapidly approaching Sparkling Aria range. However, I have a pretty funny idea here. I'm going to decide to save the energy and actually go for a catch and sneak of the Twister onto a Azumarill. This does mean that I have surrendered Switch Advantage, but I have a ton of stored Lapras energy, and I'm going to need it as my opponent sends out Clodsire. This is a matchup where having Hydro Pump is very nice. Hydro Pump will guarantee huge damage on the Clodsire or Shield. Clodsire is actually on Sludge Bomb. I feel like that's more of a rarity nowadays. Usually when I see Clodsire, it's on Stone Edge. But Sludge Bomb is a pretty big problem for Azumarill, and my opponent is going to go for such a nasty overfarm here. They're just shy of 100 energy, so I'm going to have to throw one Psywave and then go for my move. So I bring the Lapras, he tries for the catch on a Mantine, but I can just fully Psywave it down. Mantine gets KO'd, his final Pokemon is revealed to be Umbreon. After seeing his entire team, suddenly I have regrets about the fancy catch that I did earlier on. I could have just won Switch Advantage, had a Azumarill to shut down the Umbreon, and Sableye would have done well enough in a Clodsire that we could have won. But now, I don't have Switch Advantage, and the path to victory might not be so clear. I'm going to fire off this Drain Punch, and then just do what Sableye does best. Boost up its defense again and again and again. My opponent could have thrown on Alignment there to deny my second Drain Punch, but it still wouldn't have taken the knockout. They bring back in the Clodsire, and suddenly I realize I have a guaranteed win condition in this game. The Earthquake's gonna land. I just have to Shadow Claw this into Foul Play range. Because I have a move banked on the Lapras, I'm gonna have a move banked on the Sableye, and both win charge stack priority over that Umbreon. So I farm up well past 100 just to ensure that I put them in a range where Foul Play will knock out. Foul Play is gonna knock out the Clodsire. I have the Drain Punch for the Umbreon, and now I can just zero turn out and go for the combo play with the Lapras. Because Lapras is gonna be winning charge stack priority over the Umbreon, so that endgame did get quite scary, but luckily enough, we were able to find the guaranteed win condition and escape with the win. We got a Core Breaker on the lead in the next match, and its name is Stunfisk. Now, this team is very, very weak to Electric. However, I was able to beat a surprising amount of Electric Pokemon. If you see a Sweet Electrode, the game is probably just over, but if you see a lot of other Electric types, it's actually quite playable. This is a matchup where having a high-ranked Lapras again is going to save me, because look at this. If you have a very high-ranked Lapras, you can actually survive 2 discharges, and on 1 HP, you are going to make it to a second Sparkling Aria. This guarantees that I get Switch Advantage or Shield Advantage. So, even though it's a Core Breaker, I'm still able to get huge damage onto that Stunfisk. I bring in the Sableye, I get 1 turn bring-in lag, and man, even though this Legend Run was done in Competitors Cup, I cannot wait until we have regular Open Great League back. The lag in Competitors Cup has been insane. Please get me back to this new system. The new system does have its weirdness sometimes, but overall, I felt that it played significantly cleaner than this old system. My opponent now sends in Malamar, and if they're bringing Malamar into a Sableye, then they must be exceedingly core broken in the back. I'm going to put up the Protect Shield as they fire off the Foul Play, and I can probably even risk going for a Drain Punch here. After I go for the Foul Play, of course, because Foul Play is going to get some nice damage on them, and then they're probably going to be in Drain Punch range. So I will go for the Drain Punch. May as well boost up my defense while I take the knockout, and that way, if my opponent has Fast Move Pressure in the back, I'm going to be okay. But they don't have Fast Move Pressure in the back. It's going to be a Corviknight. So even despite an Electric type, it still just did not matter. The high-rank Lapras was able to force a Shield Advantage, and then Azumarill is just on cleanup duty in the endgame. Hopping into the final match, beating Lapras into Shadow Talonflame. I was 4-0 in this set, 1 win away from Legend, and this was the final battle. Shadow Talonflame is a Pokemon I haven't really seen a lot of because Talonflame is basically a dead mon on the new system with the changes to damage registration, but on the old system, people are still trying to run a few Incinerate users. I put up the shield expecting Flame Charge, but they're not on Flame Charge, they go for Fly. My opponent save switches into an astonished Ludicolo, and that's not a Pokemon I was expecting to see. I send in Sableye, fire off the Drain Punch, but I end up mistiming it, so I throw an Alignment. At the very least, I have boosted up my defense. Now it's my opponent's turn to throw an Alignment. With the boost, I should live an Energy Ball here. My opponent goes for the Weather Ball, and they're going to have to throw back-to-back. So they are now at, I believe, 10 energy, which means I should be able to overfarm quite a bit on the Lapras. So I send in the Lapras, my opponent throws 3 Astonishes, and I realize this can only be a Weather Ball. Weather Ball Water, not going to be a problem whatsoever, and I can just fire off this Aria. Aria is double resisted. I think it should barely take the knockout here. Oh, it turns out it leaves them on 1 HP, and I get 1 extra Psywave. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is Carbink, and it looks like we have won the game. Aria does nice damage. In comes Azumarill. They're going to send in the Talonflame. and this becomes a 50-50. Do they go for the Brave Bird? I put up the shield. They go for the Brave Bird, and the game is over. Azumarill bubbles down Talonflame, and now Carbink just has no way out. My only lose con in this moment would be maybe if I ended up baiting, so I just full send the Hydro Pump. They put up the shield, but there's just no path to victory here. They can never do enough damage to Azumarill. Carbink's entire shtick is just being bulkier than everything and outlasting it, but you can't out-bulk Azu. Azu makes the Hydro Pump. So long, good night to the Carbink. Carbink is getting KO'd, and that secured us the 5-0 to get us to Legend rank. And I believe I included me claiming the set here. We claim it, we get up to 30-12 elo, and that is Legend done for Season 27 of Pokemon Go Battle League. ABA Water is definitely not one of the most conventional teams to hit Legend this season, but the team ended up being very strong into my elo bracket. Is this a team that I would recommend people try and emulate for themselves? I think the answer is probably no. This team was very strong into the elo bracket that I was playing in, where there was a ton of dragons and electric type usage was way down. But if you're in an elo bracket where Morpeko was all over the place, for example, then you're just going to get ruthlessly swept again and again by Morpeko. So I kind of wanted to make this video to showcase the kind of team that I use to make it to Legend, but to also advise that I don't necessarily recommend that others try the team for themselves. However, I do firmly believe that the age of balanced teams in Go Battle League is basically over. So many of the early Legend teams for this season are what I would consider to be unbalanced teams. They're teams that are ABA weak to something. Because, basically, for lack of a more eloquent way to say it, the developers have made more and more Pokemon increasingly viable. Even if they're not necessarily meta, the amount of B-tier Pokemon has exponentially increased over the past several years. This means that, theoretically, throughout many games of Go Battle League, you can encounter substantially more variety compared to what you would before, because there's just way more things that are viable. The consequence of way more things being viable is that there are no longer truly perfect cores. Like back in the day, you could have two Pokemon that covered each other's weaknesses absolutely perfectly. There were no core breakers. But the amount of viable Pokemon that have different coverage now, that's not the case. So trainers end up trying to find the best cores that they can, but they're always going to have breakers. So you try and find two Pokemon that cover each other's weaknesses pretty well, but they're going to have certain weaknesses. And then you just try and set it up to where the core that you're running, the thing that you're ABA weak to, is not a common threat. Like in my elo bracket, there was basically no Morpeko. There was not a lot of Forretress just because there was so much Kanto Ninetales. So I really wanted to run a team that was very strong with the core duo of Azumarill plus Lapras. I wanted to be very strong into Kanto Ninetales and very strong into Dragon, as those were kind of the two meta threats that I was seeing again and again. I really liked Lapras' ability to win matchups that it has zero business ever winning. Like Lapras just straight up beating Trailblaze Florges is one of the funniest matchups I've ever seen. Florges, on paper, it is everything to win that matchup, and it just doesn't win that matchup just because of how good Lapras is. Lapras can win the zeros into Empoleon. It can also win the zeros into Unova Stunfisk. So even if you do run into some of those kind of problematic Pokemon, you can also get Tinkaton very low in the zeros. So it's kind of just making a game plan, more or less, for those problem Pokemon. You know you're going to run into problem Pokemon. That's going to happen, but it's try and pick problem Pokemon for your core that are less common than others, and then from there, develop a concrete game plan for how you're going to deal with that. Because when you run into the things you're targeting, you're obviously going to be at a pretty big advantage. Like, there were so many times that people ended up saving a Dragon for later in the game, assuming that Lapras was my only Dragon counter, just for me to bring out the Azumarill, and the energy basically didn't really go anywhere. And that's because normally people aren't running this kind of an ABA unbalanced team. But this was kind of a mini TED Talk here at the end of the video, talking about how I think team building is shifting in Go Battle League, but I think it's shifting in a very interesting way. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. Thank you guys, I love you very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.